I'm Joshua, I'm an INTP, and first and foremost I would like to say thank you for viewing this video and subsequently visiting my channel. The topic of this video will be on Rationalism Part 2. I would like to discuss this topic more because I received a very position rebuttal, and so I'd like to address that and maybe keep this dialogue going on in several different videos. So if anybody has any arguments or issues with what I'm saying, then feel free to write them out, state them, and I'll be happy to address them. The thing I would say is this: the reason why I say that human beings, well, first, I wouldn't say that I don't think that human beings, the capacity, I don't think that the subjective and the objective doesn't run parallel to one another. I think that they do in one way, but also one gives rise in birth to another in another way. The first thing I would say is that I think fundamentally that the brain is self-organizing in nature, and I don't take this philosophizing exercise outside of the realm of neurophrenology. And it's the case that I know for a fact that a majority of the brain is, well, at least the brain wires itself from the bottom up, meaning from the lowest base parts of the brain in terms of the hypothalamus all the way to the prefrontal cortex. And it's the case that the innervative architecture of the brain is made such that it has a bottom-up tier control. It's not solely bottom-up. The top down, it's mostly bottom up, and it has a bit down of top tier innervation and functioning. But if you were looking at the I guess centers of the brain that have the biggest clout in the room, it is always the lower order structures in what we would consistently associate with what it means to be irrational, or that without voice and that without language, that without instrumentation. And I don't really think that there is objectivity living in people. I think that human beings, because we're tool making, our brains were adapted to being able to understand the environment in such a manner that it can render the environment as a tool for its own goals and interest. And because we are like that, and we have the need to be able to communicate with one another on higher degrees of resolution beyond just physical expressions. I mean, in the sense that, you know, we communicate a lot with body language, but we need something more sophisticated to represent higher chains of action. I think human beings, our brain, like even the current human brain is only about 20,000 or 20 to 60,000 years old. Modern humans are only about 20 to 60,000 years old. The architecture has not changed, and in that 20,000 to 60,000 year old time span, much of what happened was a reduction in the size of the corpus callosum. So that means the talking and connectivity between the right and the left hemisphere, though this reduction was going on for long before 60,000 to 20,000 years ago. And the rapid growth of the prefrontal cortex, or the frontal region. And so I know that certainly current humans are not completely like prehistoric humans, and we're certainly moving to different epochs and becoming more capable of being individuals that are more predicated on the modes of instrumentative thought than that of the vigilant, or what we classically associate with irrationality. But because the brain is self-organizing, and because most of what we are is built from the bottom up, and most of what constitutes our happening in the world has to deal with the fact that we're embodied. The things are self-emergent and self-organizing. And the reason why I emphasize that and put the because there is the fact that the lower order regions, the midbrain and the lower brain, gives rise to the upper brain. All of this deterministic framework and hardware gives rise to what we understand in terms of our self and our will. And the amount of us that is a self and a will is very much so the smallest portion of ourselves. I'm not somebody who goes so far to say that human beings don't have free will, because I honestly can't know that. But what I do know is that most decisions are not made, or at least most decisions that seem conscious in a person, depending on the context and the degree of the decisions and thoughts. Like sophisticated thought and action, not just mere reactions or responses. That hasn't been studied. But we know that neuroscientists, or cognitive scientists know for the most part that many thoughts are not had by the person, and by the time the person thinks that they're having the thought has been transmitted and delivered to their prefrontal mind or their rational mind, far before they recognized it. And it's the case that most of what your brain is there for is to pick up and differentiate information from the environment. And I mean pick up and differentiate information from the environment which you're not aware of. How is it that you know who and what you're attracted to? I can tell you don't do it rationally. How is it that how you know many things, and how you are led through the world in many ways, even if you put thought into it? Why you are motivated to move in that direction is not decided or guided by any kind of immediate processing in terms of your cognition. Why you wake up in the morning, you won't find that your thoughts or what you would consistently associate as you, are responsible for most of what you do, most of what your body produces, and most of what your mind produces in terms of certain affects. And by those affects, I mean the emotions. Now, it's the case that every human being is comprised of a set of fundamental drives in terms of base circuits that just mediate most activity and behavior. Whether that be the reward network, whether that be the panic network, whether that be sadness, human beings, even in or the nurture circuit, there's several circuits, and I have a video on emotions if you wish to reference those things. But even in terms of the ways in which we learn, it's contextually dependent. If we do not, it's contextually dependent. Like, people don't just take in what they consider as meaningless information. They really don't. To a certain degree you do, but to most of the things that you either learn things by passively drinking them in over time with prolonged experience, or actively trying to engage some sort of activity or mimicking some person or something. But most of what makes you tick is not anything that comes down to your capacity to think or your volition. It's and for that reason, I say human beings are fundamentally irrational. It's not that they don't have the capacity to be rational, or that they don't have the capacity to be instrumentative, or they don't have the capacity to think or anything like that. It's just that that's not what typifies their existence. It's not what typifies even how they respond to things in the world. I mean, it's certainly the fact that, you know, it's certainly due to the fact that you have the ability to put two and two together in terms of what something means in a social interaction. But I mean, there are many things that the modern person takes for granted that is not so local to modernity, or what they have learned, or what they know from their immediate locale and time and space. And I think that I'm not saying that people shouldn't try to be rational, or that we ought not to think about the world, but I think it's a gross mischaracterization of human nature to say that human beings are rational, because it makes it such that you don't reference the things that are most salient to the landscape of human phenomenology, which is motivation. I mean, volitional action and even unconscious volitional action is mediated by human motivation. However you wish to describe motivation is dependent on the psychologist or the psychoanalyst, but it's the case that the fact that you have goals and are mediated by goals is definitely why you experience positive emotion or why you experience negative emotion. If you're looking at the suite of goals which you have, those which are conscious and those which are not conscious, the unconscious ones, you did not create those, and even the conscious ones, you did not have a hand in completely creating those. Partly you take reference and stock from your environment. That's why you're a cultural and a behavioral thing. And partly you take stock in, I guess, cue from your temperament. Your temperamental factors are the next basis in terms of your overall interests and predilections and movements towards a thing. And I think that, you know, that's important to understand, and that's important to know. It doesn't mean that it doesn't mean that rationality is not important, and it doesn't mean that the fact that we're able to be instrumentative and think isn't a very prominent feature of our existence. But it's not the feature of our existence which we should characterize ourselves by, because I think human history and even modernity stands to show that people are not rational. I mean, in fact, people are predictably irrational. To steal a phrase from Dan Eyerly, you can look at economics, Western economics, for example, and people don't intuitively understand concepts like exponential growth. I mean, researchers have done plenty of experiments where they've tested people's ability to weigh value between two objects whenever prices are into consideration. And I mean, once free steps into the equation, people become almost utterly incapable. I mean, that's not for all people, but for most people, on average, they almost become utterly incapable to make sensible value-based decisions when things are free. If you start talking to somebody about, you know, the factors of delayed gratification and understanding exponential growth, would you rather take a large lump sum right now, or would you prefer for somebody to give you a penny every day, with the penny increasing, the amount of pennies you're given increased with each day for a year? Surprisingly, most people take the lump sum, but if you take the penny, you know, if you get 1 penny the first day, you get 2 pennies the second day, 3 pennies the third day, 4 pennies, and so on and so forth. That's an exponential growth function, and the amount of money you stand to make is much larger if you go with the penny route. But people, I mean, that's a function of mathematics, or that's a fact of mathematics. But people don't intuitively put those things together. And what I think constitutes a creature's disposition are its instincts and its intuitions, the things which it doesn't learn, the things it comes into the world with in terms of tools for appraising its environment and acting in it. And when you look at the natural repertoire that any person comes with, I mean, like, children are perfect examples. Yeah, I mean, even uneducated adults. So you have to take in mind that there are still indigenous cultures out there in the world. And yes, the West has gone through a process, and it's a very long process. But if you look at an uneducated Westerner and you compare them to, like, somebody from the Piraha tribe or something like that, they're not very different. And they are different, but I mean, like, in terms of their IQ scores, you're probably not going to find a substantial difference between somebody, and when I say uneducated, I mean that they're not interested in books and various things like that. Not necessarily that they've gone to college or anything like that, but they don't have a public school education or anything like that, or they dropped out of school. Typically, most people who drop out of school are, not all, but many. And it's the case that, there are real reasons to suspect and to know, I guess, to suspect, and for myself to be comfortable with saying that human beings are fundamentally irrational. I mean, and I think when you ask what rationality is, I really think rationality is first appraised by the goals that somebody has in mind. And I mean, once you have a goal set, there is a most optimal way of achieving that goal in terms of with respects to the parameters of time and resources which you have. Then when you're talking about epistemological rationality, it's the case that, people can either make appropriate models and descriptions of the world or not. And I mean, if you're looking at people's tendencies to make accurate models and descriptions of the world, it's not common and it's not natural. I mean, it's the case that science is very old. I mean, it's not old in comparison to the institution of religion, but it's old in terms of history of any person living right now. And there's a reason why science is very powerful, and because the first thing it realizes is that human reasoning is flawed. And it's the case that we have to go through a very arduous process of trying to disprove our ideas and using peers in large bodies of eyes and ears and minds to really see that we've come to a true conclusion. Because the idea that people, but the idea that most people, I'm not saying all people, can come up with viable models of the world. I mean, that's naturally, and not the case. I mean, it takes some practice, schooling, and discipline. And I'm not saying that the rationality is not valuable or anything like that, but I'm saying that I think it's just a larger myth as a biblical narrative to say that human beings are rational, because they're not. I can't see how somebody can say that. I can't see how somebody would make that claim or estimation, given the very nature of our physiology. And I don't mean even prehistoric. I mean modern. I mean, most people are. You have several cognitive blind spots, and it's the case that you're not very good at appraising many factors of reality. I mean, we don't know that without instrumentation, we don't know at least like 2/3 of the the light spectrum or the wave spectrum. We don't know so much about the world. It's not that we haven't taken the time to find these things out, but part of one's ability to be rational is their ability to have accurate descriptions of reality. And it's the case that we cannot have accurate descriptions of reality naturally. And it's the case that left up to our own devices and left up to our own just our base tools, we don't do it. It's with the aid of the environment and what we can do by willing the environment to our goals and our interests that we accomplish these feats and do these things. I mean, that's quite remarkable, given the fact that we're animals and we can do things like this. But I would say that don't mistake that for human beings being rational. I mean, I think even the pursuit of the enterprise of rationality in of itself is not necessarily, well, I mean, it's a really hard thing to estimate. I mean, you have to at least know this, that we're good at getting better and better approximations of what the world actually is, and what corresponds to reality. But I mean, those models are imperfect, and that's why facts change, and they will consistently change. It's not that the models have to be perfect in order for us to know much about the world, or in order for us to accomplish many goals within the world. I mean, like, that's not the case. But the epistemological ideal of the rational man, or perfect knowledge, I mean, like, that's not ever going to be seen or achieved. And I mean, that's why we're trying to build AI and trying to build different modes of thinking, and why people take the time to deal with concepts like deep learning and what is the best type of brain for learning. And I tell you, it's not the human one. I mean, it's like, if you have a few parameters, and well, yeah, if you just have a few parameters on that, things I don't really want to take the time to get into, partly because I don't know them as well as I know neurophrenology, and I don't want to give an alternative to rationalism. I guess like this, my alternative is realism. I don't think realism is necessarily rationalism. I think rationalism is an ideal. I think realism is what's actual. Human beings are fundamentally irrational creatures that can be rational. And fundamentally just means first and foremost. It doesn't mean only, but just first and foremost. Like, that's what it is. It doesn't mean that there aren't any other features or important features to it, but it's not the biggest, rationality is not the biggest feature, and the one that you should probably consider in the greatest degrees whenever you're trying to figure out why exactly something is occurring in the anthropomorphic landscape. I mean, when you're trying to address the question of why, I mean, as somebody who's, like, spending a lot of time trying to understand human nature, I can tell you that a lot of the things, for example, why do people have addictions and things like that? I mean, your brain has a certain relationship to fat and sugars, and that relationship makes some amount of sense given put against a Pleistocene landscape. It makes sense, but I mean, in terms of modernity and current context, it doesn't make the way people respond and act towards sugar doesn't make a whole heck of a lot of sense. And it's the case that there are many things like this. Why people are bad at appraising exponential growth. Why people have a very hard time appraising free. Why people have a very hard time appraising somebody's levels of honesty or not. And it's like a lot of different factors. I mean, like, I'm not saying every person has it bad as the next person, but I mean, there's a reason why human beings are fundamentally vulnerable, and why we consider ourselves flawed to some degree, because I mean, our cognition is not perfect, and I'm not saying perfect cognition is rationality, but I guess I should give an example of what a rational creature would be, or at least what I can estimate as rational to the best of my abilities. Or at least I think I've said that. Or yeah, I said what I think rationality is previously, and I think, like, true rationality is an exercise, but it's not a mode of being. I mean, it's an exercise because of the mode of being you actually have, or what you actually are, because of the creature you are. Because I think you will be wrong, and you are wrong. Like, most likely about whatever it is you think or you believe about the world, in your first conception of it, and even maybe in your third, fourth, fifth, 10th conception and iteration of it, it's wrong. I mean, the things that people say oftentimes, like correlation doesn't equal causation. Like, that's, you know, that's one that's true, but it also is something that annoys me, because yeah, correlation doesn't equal causation, but who says you need to know what causes something to be able to come up with the best explanation for something in terms of something you can predict and act on? Like, that's not necessary. I mean, like, that's really not necessary for any of those things to be the case. But people have thoughts, and people have beliefs and facts are more so a set of tested beliefs, but they're just beliefs. They're beliefs that have withstood the test of time and experimentation, but that, I mean, like, they're beliefs still, and they are subject to change. I mean, and not every kind of, and not every system of thought or ideation can produce the same sorts of facts and beliefs. I mean, there's a reason why classical mechanics can't produce the same results as relativity, because when you have kind of Judeo-Christian thoughts about the nature of the universe, you think that time is linear, that space is fixed, and it's uniform. Several features that, you know, several things that don't, if you take the Bible literally, that don't, you know, are not, you know, that's not how the universe actually is. And it's the case that we find ourselves revising these things time and time again. And I think that that's because, I mean, we as human beings get to better and better vistas of knowledge because collectively we throw our hats into the dark, and sometimes whenever we take a gamble, something happens to work out. But it's collectively. We're all living in the dark, and we're just feeling our way around trying to get somewhere. But the fact that we oftentimes think that we're right, or we're always getting somewhere, is wrong. I mean, like, most ideas that even come out in this time, this day and age, and from 2018 up to 2025, most of them will be thrown out. And if you look at, even if you look at on, you just look on the internet, per se, about the amount of information that is out in the world and how much of it is useful information or accurate information, most of it is not. Many of the factors and the symptoms of the world have to deal with the fact that people are not very good at making models, appraising action, appraising the, you know, we're not very good at appraisal nor acting, you know. We are better than most animals. I mean, like all other animals. But if we're trying to create an ideal, because the rational man is an ideal, we certainly don't meet it. And it's certainly not a description of what and who we actually are. And I'm not somebody who's about ideologies. I don't really like ideologies in the first place, so that's why I have an issue with something like rationalism. I would prefer to rip away all ideology and just have realism and deal with that. But I think the rational animal is an ideal, and it's something, and because it's an ideal, it's something of a myth. I mean, not all myths are bad, but I think this myth is rather problematic. I mean, like, if I were going to, the reason I think it's a problematic idea is because people are not very good at being honest with themselves in the first place, and so they don't really need. This is my argument. People are not very good at being honest with themselves, like, at all. Like, I mean, like, yeah, they are to some extent. I mean, but for the most part, no. Like, no, they're not. I mean, myself included. Like, that's why I share my ideas, and I want people to say things about them, and I talk to people all the time, and I debate them, and I do all sorts of things to just see, you know, do I really know what I'm talking about, and am I as sure of this thing as I think that I am? And usually it's not true. And usually I'm trying to break down my ideas by myself as well, and seeing if they hold merit. It's the case that, well, because that's what I'm trained to do. I mean, like, you know, not because I naturally do that, but that's, you know, that's what I'm trained to do. But it's just a case that, you know, if we're, okay, so, let me back this up. Okay, people are not very good at being honest with themselves, and people tend to, well, positive illusions. I guess we'll start there. Because the brain is very much in the business of creating positive illusions. Though trying to define what one of those are is not very obvious. But the brain is very good at lying to itself about its self-image. It usually tends to overestimate or underestimate. Like, it's very hard, or it's very hard for people to be good at appraising, very accurate at appraising their selves at something. Without discipline and education, I mean, usually that's why experts step outside of their domain of expertise. I mean, people are not, like, and I'm saying usually. I mean, it's most, I'm not saying all people, but it's most people. Most people to the point where it's almost all. And the all that doesn't do it, the only reason they don't do it is not because they're inherently or naturally that way, but because they learn or because they're educated. I mean, and not just purely academically educated, but they have some experience out in the world. Something tells them that that's not a proper way to operate in the world, and it's not their neurophrenology. I mean, I would say it's not their neurophrenology. It's their neurophrenology's ability to recognize threat, pain, and guilt and shame, like a whole bunch of other things. But it's not something that's just instantiated in the hardware in of itself that comes out when they're kicking and screaming as babies. I mean, and so people aren't very good at being honest with themselves. It's like, for the reasons I just mentioned earlier. Now, it's the case that when you have an ideal, do you think, given the tendency of the brain to be something that tends to lie to itself in the first place, that it's going to be very good at appraising its ability to meet the ideal or miss the ideal? Most times it's not, and that's the reason why the Bible's written in the way that it is, because, you know, if the Bible didn't say man was wretched and sinful and things like that, people would probably think that they're just all fine and dandy and there's nothing wrong with them. Many people would. And if it didn't tell people that they were wonderfully made and things like that, there's a whole host of people that would think that they're wretched and they're the worst things on the planet. I mean, like, that's, because that's how human nature is, like, to some extent, when it comes to its ability to praise itself and praise others. Like, I mean, like, because, and there's reasons for that. I mean, there's reasons for that, because we weren't set up to be things of just, purely accurate appraisal. Most of your appraisal schemes in your brain are set up for social interactions, predators, food, mate selection, tool quality, your ability to wield or to handle something, like, what does this thing do, and could I do something with that? Like, a lot of things which have been extrapolated and generalized themselves over time, given your ability to abstract themselves and cluster together in something called the G factor, or what we consider general intelligence. But I mean, it's a general thing, and it's not the thing calling the shots or running the decisions, man. Like, it's really not. And because your brain's like that, you're not very good at going out into the world, at least not without training and education and things like that. That's why we have school systems. That's why we have books, and that's why we have parents and and wisdom and culture in the first place. Because you left by yourself and your brain to run on its own, you're not very good at a lot of things like that we value or we find useful. And that's why that's why people send you to school for years and years and years on end. Or why you have to consume even if you're gifted, you have to study to a certain extent, because you will come up with some funny ideas and you will come up with some silly things. Like, even adults, even adults, that's why in science there's a peer review process. Like, and even that doesn't ensure that most of the results are appropriate. Like, how many studies you see in any scientific journal that can be reproduced is probably 22% of all that you read. Like, most science experiments are bad. Like, or most papers that are published are bad. Like, we've tried to curb this fact in science, like, in many ways, but people, no matter where you try to look in terms of the human enterprise, we're not very good at being accurate. Even INTPs and those that champion accuracy, if you were to take stock and estimation of how many ideas that if you were being honest with yourself in the first place and trying to give yourself a good estimation of how many times you're right about something when you first think about it versus how many times you're wrong about something when you first think about it, I mean, like, across your lifespan, oh man, like, bad ideas, many bad ideas, and the only reason they've gotten better is because you've learned more as you've gotten older. But, I mean, if you're thinking about human nature, human brain, what we actually are and what constitutes our existence, there's much to be desired in some areas, but we're getting better, and we have a lot of things in place that mitigates these factors, and that's why these institutions exist. But these institutions do not exist because human beings are rational. In fact, these institutions exist because human beings are not rational, and that's why we're trying to develop things like AI. And I'm not saying that we shouldn't try to be rational or anything like that, but I think we need to get rid of ideals. Like, we really need to get rid of ideals to a certain extent. And, I mean, like, our current conception of certain ideals and certain schools of thought, because they're not useful. They're really not useful. I mean, it would be more useful to tell somebody that they're probably... I mean, that's why science is so bloody freaking effective. Like, even though it has, like, a lot of issues, part of the reason why it's bloody freaking effective is because people on a daily basis are told that they're probably wrong, and that they need to revise their ideas and work things out and spend a long time studying something and looking at something with large data samples before they can ever say that it's a thing. And, like, and then they have to submit whatever ideas and whatever papers they have to a vicious peer review process. There's a reason why that's the case, and it's not because even the most brilliant and gifted people in the world are rational. Like, it's the case that people are not. And, I mean, people collectively are very, very... And it has nothing to do with intelligence, and, like, that's something that really fucking annoys me, like, the conflation between IQ and rationality. Look, it doesn't matter how smart you are, you're not rational. Like, it really doesn't. Like, you will be better at certain things and learning quicker than other people, but you're not without the, you can be got too. Trust me, I know. You can be got. It's just the case that, like, everybody makes bloody freaking mistakes. And part of the reason why everybody makes bloody freaking mistakes is because knowledge is a process. Like, most of the facts are wrong because you have these very irrational and fact-missing human beings making this enterprise of knowledge. So knowledge is a process and it's being revised. Also, you don't if you're not, brilliantly creative and then patient, like, you're probably not, like, probably first time in, it's not going to work out unless you're extremely lucky. Like, it's the case that, it's not easy. Like, it's not easy. That's why even there have been many geniuses or people you would probably consider geniuses throughout the ages, but we don't know about them. Because their work it didn't stick around. It really didn't stick around. I mean, like, how many people have written things? How many scores of plays and movies and whatever have been made and written? How many you know about and how many we keep around? That's not just simply because people are particularly picky, but it's because most things are wrong or most things are bad or they're not good. Like, it's the case that that's the I guess, like, truest nature of mankind, like, or the truest description of the enterprise of knowledge and rationality. Like, it's, it's got its skeletons, but, I mean, that doesn't mean it's not a valued thing, or it's not beautiful, or it's not, or anything like that. But it just I don't like inaccuracy, I just really don't, and I think we would, if we even want to create ideals, it would make more sense to get an accurate description of a human being than to create an ideal after that fact. But not before it. Like, not before it. Because you won't do anything that... It will all be lies and hearsay. You will only have hypocrisy. You'll have a very interesting, peculiar kind of little game that we like to play with ourselves. We're already halfway pathological. Like, there's something very seriously pathological about human beings in general. Okay, so maybe I shouldn't say that. But you're more like chimpanzees than you know. Like, you're more like chimpanzees than you know. And, it's just the case, even modern people, I mean, I'm not kidding. Like, okay, so you think, like, And obviously not every person is like it. You know, violence has decreased in the world. You know, the rate of violent crimes has decreased in the world. And the rate of aggravated assaults have decreased over the past 100 years or 50 years. But I mean, they still happen, and there's reason for that. You know, there's certain, and I'm not saying that violence is irrational, and in certain ways it is, in certain ways it isn't, but, I think this ultimately, it would be better to tell people that they're not rational and that they're going to be wrong most times about whatever it is they think, know, or believe, because they're not rational. And it's the case that, or at least you're not a completely rational thinking being, and you don't really, and honestly, like, what governs your thoughts, I mean, like, we don't know that, like, completely, like, we really don't know that. And it's the case that you find that things as sensitive as the type of bacteria in your gut, the, like, you're a walking vat of hormones, like, very much so, and how those hormones tend to interact in such a, and what instigates those hormones, like, I mean, you're a very bloody freaking intricate thing, and what leads to you thinking what everything you think, like, it's a bloody freaking mystery to some extent, like, it really is, like, we're getting better about piecing it together, but mankind, the human animal is a very interesting and complicated thing, and it's the case that the more we find out about this interesting and complicated thing, the more we realize it's more animal and beast than it might really think or know. And because it's more animal and more beast than it might think it is or it knows, you should estimate that we're a bunch of monkeys trying to put some sticks together, and we're not always successful at doing it. I mean, like, that's what I really think. That doesn't mean I don't think that human beings are, beautiful. I mean, I freaking love human beings, I really do. Like, sometimes I do. A lot of times I don't like them. But, I mean, I love them, but I don't always like them. Like, I don't always like them. And I think that, human beings are the greatest kinds of creatures that exist on this planet. They're bloody freaking remarkable. Like, you know, like, your hamster isn't going to get off of its wheel one day and really impress you with the amount of differential calculus it's come up with. But, you know, a human being, like, the fact that a human being can come up with something so abstract is very remarkable. It's amazing. Like, it's quite amazing. And the things that human beings can do, period. The fact that we can speak, you know, even in the first place. And to the degree at which we can speak, you know, how many different languages that exist or have existed across the span of human history. It's quite remarkable. I mean, I'm a humanist. You know, we have there are probably more dead languages than there are active languages. And there's still, I don't know if there's, I don't know if there is thousands or millions. It's a very big number. 10 to the something. But I don't know what that number actually is, but it's the case that it's rather large. And the fact that, you know, it's like that, part of the reason it's like that because it takes several iterations of something in order to get it good or efficient. But also, it's because human beings are freaking incredible. Like, it's really incredible that we can adapt in the ways that we can and that we have such abstracting capacities. Because, I mean, like, we're the only thing out here that's like that. At least on this planet. And I mean, like, the chances of it, whatever, that's another video, that's a discussion for another video. I mean, like, I don't really think that there's extraterrestrials or anything like that out in the world. I mean, there might be, but, like, you know, to get cognitively advanced life, I mean, we almost didn't make it, like, you know, like, this, nature's hostile, like, it's bloody freaking hostile. But, okay, like, alright, so, point is, like, rationalism needs to die. I think, like, many things need to die. Like, I don't have any fidelity to any kind of ideas. Like, I really don't. Like, I mean, like, I like certain things, but I don't really care for any one idea over another. Like, I just think, like, if it's not true, it's not true. And I think, like, it's not true. And I don't leave that, and I don't think that that's a matter of opinion. I think that that's a matter of description. It's not an accurate or true description of the world. It's not an accurate or true description of human beings. Like, we're not rational creatures. We have the capacity to be rational, but we're not rational. Like, we are not actually rational. I'd just like to destroy everything, like, that's not useful or not true. I mean, I'm not saying rationalism wasn't useful when it first came around, but I mean, like, it's running its course, because there are some seriously bad, like, it puts a hamper on the ideas that can really come about, because it has this overlooming presence in the field of philosophy and science, and, like, I would just like to smash it. I'm not Nietzsche, but I'd like to do philosophy with a hammer, just get it out of here. Like, and see if it withstands the pressure. You know, if it does, then great, but I'm skeptical about rationalism. I'm skeptical about a lot of things, like, but I'm very much skeptical about rationalism, very much so. Like, I don't think I'm logical. Like, I really don't think I'm logical. I think that, like, I think human beings can be logical or can practice logic, but I think logic is a practice or it's a discipline. It's an academic field or domain, but what I do is not logic. I mean, like, I don't think that. Or at least I don't think that I am actually logical. I think that I can use logic, and I think I can use logic, or I think I can act in a logical way, but I don't think that makes me logical, like, even in the slightest. Like, because I know I'm an animal, and there are some limitations. Like, there are some serious limitations. But that doesn't mean I shouldn't try, and it doesn't mean that it's not a useful exercise. Like, those things aren't the case, but I mean, that's how I see it. Because I think it's more accurate than not. And you know, it will become more accurate with time, and time will tell. Like, time will only be the only determiner. But I mean, I just think, like, well, I know I'm going to write several things, and, like, we'll see. You know, we'll just see if they withstand the test of time. You know, but I mean, I don't think I'm. I might be wrong, but I don't think I'm wrong about I don't think I'm wrong about this one. But okay, so that's my video. Thank you for watching, and hopefully you found it interesting.